1853. You know, I bought this used not so long ago. Barely played. I forgot one of my components for it. This little cloth bag that I don't use. Nice linen goes with this. I bought this used not so long ago, and I really kind of questioned myself, did I want it? Why am I buying this? I got a good price on it, but it's one that when I had played it long ago, and I only played it once, because the guy who owned it didn't really know the rules and had a lot of trouble explaining it, and I felt like nothing was making sense throughout the whole game. But I didn't feel like I terribly enjoyed it. For the most part, for a very simple reason, which is the stock market is that 1829 stock market. The linear market with the kind of neat facet of the multiple share increases on one run, or multiple value increases on one run if you get multiples of your current value. I like that little mechanism. I liked it in 1829, but 1829 was such a dull game. And I was worried this would be too. And I'm kind of pleasantly surprised, not just because of the surprise ending. In fact, not at all to do with the surprise ending. In a sense, I'm kind of disappointed about that because it means I didn't figure anything out, I think. And I'm really worried that maybe I cheated or something accidentally and have no idea, you know, what might have happened to make that guy win. If anything, though, the only thing I can think of with him looked like I may have made an error in his disfavor. Anyway. What do I really like about this? Well, let's pause on that and go on to the components in particular. The map's kind of neat. I mean, I like this white board on the back, but you've got a very large map of India here. Much larger than most 18XX maps. I mean, obviously there are some humongous ones like the C2C and 18 Europe or whatever, and 18 East Coast. There's some really huge ones out there. But for a commercially produced one, this one's got a very nice large map. There's a lot of room to grow in it. I like the terrain being on here and then referenced via your little cards in terms of what you're going to charge. That gives everybody the information they need. You don't have to lean over the board and try to figure everything out quite the same as you do in most 18XX. Sometimes it's hard to read the amount that a hex is going to cost you. On the other hand, the territorial restrictions are kind of a pain in the butt. Probably not so bad if you're holding your corporation right in your hand, but you have to be aware of the other ones too. And there's sort of a textual chart version of that in the rules, but I couldn't figure it out. So the picture is the only way that I could really handle it. You've got this, which gives the specifics, but I don't think it gives them enough that you can be absolutely certain of everything. I'm not sure. Certainly you'd have to look at the picture to figure out how to decipher that in all cases, even if it does have a rubric that is consistent across the board. The money's very pretty. And it's not too bad. Actually, the one thing I was shocked about, I looked at it and saw those £2 notes. And I said, oh, crap. You know, I hate my $20 bills in most of the games. I hate that there's $10 bills. You know, I mean, you have 5 ones, then 2 5s make a 10, then 2 10s make a 20, and then you have the 50s in normal XX, and then you have hundreds that are just 2 50s. Well, actually, I found those £2 notes filled in the space and made it a lot easier to use. There's something that, you know, doesn't cost anything additional for the development. I mean, yeah, you have to make another picture on your bills, but having that extra denomination actually really helped in terms of grabbing the bills more quickly. So even though it seems silly, 5 always seemed like kind of the right number. Actually, I kind of like having those deuces in there, and they work out really well, much to my surprise. The little player aid cards are sufficient. I have my issue with the picture, but they have actually a lot of information. The phase information and the cost for the different terrain information is necessary for play of this game. You're taking up about the same space as most XX player or corporate charters do. And it kind of shows that, gee, most of them kind of waste their space, right? Because, sure, you can put more trains in here, you could have your cash overspilling here, but you've got this extra information printed on here, and that's kind of cool, actually. Clearly, you could go with a smaller card. Something does. Baltimore and Ohio has, well, but it has all those cube placement things, so it's a totally different setup. But you know, you could trim a normal XX corporate charter, but if you're not going to do that, if you're going to use all this space, I think it's kind of cool to give some valuable information that players need if they're running a corporation. Wow. Obviously, the stock charter, the actual stock shares themselves are attractive enough and maybe not as distinguishable as they are in most of the games because they don't have, you know, some sort of line color type information that makes them much easier to grasp. So I found myself sometimes having trouble distinguishing shares of one company from another. All right. We're going to get close to gameplay if I keep going over to the tiles. You got these nice little linen bags, which are fantastic. One of them is going to be outsourced for something else, I'm sure. But this small one might as well hold these the wooden pieces. The wooden cubes, I expressed a lot of gripe about them. I'm probably going to, I'm probably never going to do this, but I would strongly wish that I could put a little line on each one and then rotate them 90 degrees to indicate that I've run a company, because I was getting confused left and right, and I know I will always get confused, and I'll always be upset about it, and I'll never do anything about it, because that's the way I am. Apparently, the game is supposed to come with little stickers for the discs. My copy didn't. I guess whoever owned it before lost them. It probably was indicated in the sales information. I usually ignore stuff like that when I see that, gee, that's not really important. I got colored discs, that's good enough. Stickers could be useful, but I might have actually never applied them either with the, geez, I don't want to put stickers on. Because I remember Diplomacy, one of the later sets had stickers for the wooden pieces. And I really hated that. And I know in Tammany Hall I didn't put my stickers on my pieces. So I might not do it here with kind of the, what if I put them on and they're not quite perfect and then it's screwy? Yeah, you can see. But I would probably prefer counters for most of this. They'd probably be cheaper. I don't know publication costs and stuff like that. I'm sure the money mix could cause some problems for poker chip players because they need more denominations, but they don't really. It's just the only important thing is that you have the full amount correct. Here's what would be kind of a pain for poker chip players, but not a huge one again, is you'd have to put your bond aside. So you'd have to have some place to hold chips instead of just an envelope for the cash. But you could, of course, take the cash out and use that just in the envelope if you wanted, I guess. Oh, all right. Let's go to the rule book next, because I don't want to put anything else away before I get to that, but I don't want to put the other stuff away either anyhow. The rule book is kind of a mess. It's not terrible. And I'll have to say, the original had to have been horrible. I remember the blundering explanation. Now, this guy wasn't, who owned it, wasn't used to explaining games to us, so it's hard. The two games that he explained to us that I can remember were 1853 and Shanghai Trader, neither of which has very good rule sets. I walked away with the impression of this guy can't explain rules. The truth was, he can't buy games with easily explained rules. I think he would have been fine with other things. Interactions with him otherwise indicated that he probably could have. But so it was definitely clear in both games that the rules were difficult to explain. It was also felt like he wasn't completely up on the rules and such. And I didn't know to what degree. But I'll tell you, even with this rule set, if you hadn't just played it or just completely committed it to heart, this would be hard to explain, even to new XX players, because there's some really weird stuff going on here. And these rules don't do the best job. And they certainly don't do the best job of introducing XX players to what this is. They may do a better job, actually, for someone who's never played the system, because you wouldn't be entering with preconceived ideas like, oh, what do you mean? Sure, I can sell my shares, whatever. There are some intuitive ideas here, and I want to get to those in a moment, but things like, yeah, nobody has to own a share of a company. That's kind of weird in an XX environment, but I think it works over. The tokens, I found the gray and the brown, and this is really a matter of my lighting, not really being clearly distinguishable. The brown is almost this olive color, and in this natural lighting it's not so bad, but when I have my little funny eco green light, and even there's an incandescent in there as well, I can't see what the hell is going on. Alright, yeah, you have a lot of different a lot of different tiles for track, and that's because of the two different track grades. And then both track grades on one piece. And also going for a fourth color with the gray tiles, although there aren't a lot of them. There are a lot of weird things in the track that you wouldn't expect. So the green tiles are actually, for the pure track tiles, are the browns that you're used to in other XX games. And that's kind of a, minus some of them, that's kind of a slap in the face. And you don't have a lot of tightly compacted, twisted spaghetti track in this game. So in a lot of senses, you don't really end up with as many of the advanced expanded tiles that are pure track tiles, but you have a lot of weird city and doinker tiles. And then you have this thing, which if it were blown up would maybe be a lot more helpful, but it's really tough to read. And you really need this until you start to come to an understanding of what the principles in play with the track are. It helps define them. But a blown up version of this would actually help a lot. Okay, let's look to the rules and what's kind of funky that I remember about it, because there's a lot that's different about this game. The first thing right off the bat, first thing right off the bat is the money gets handed out in random amounts. So that, like, first of all, you can't expand the game with any assurance, but you also kind of sit there and say, well, why are 4 and 5 players have the same amount of money, and then they have different certificate limits? And what's going on here? There's a lot that doesn't make sense to me in the way that, like, 1830, you can look at it and you can say, okay, I can expand this to a 7-player game if I really want it. Or I can drop it to a 2-player game, and I know the system and what's going on here because the proportions are always exactly the same. You have X amount of cash between the players. You have basically a certain amount of certificates that's proportional, etc. Here, it seems like the tweaks may have been done on a playtest basis using some kind of arcane rule, art form, not a farm, art form, to try to determine what is going to happen in the game. And some of that may have to do with the next weird rule, which is the bonds. You have this contract bid at the beginning of the game, and this is completely front-loaded, First time you play the game, you've got to try to figure out what the hell cities and stocks you want to have. The rules may not be, and they weren't for me at all the first time I played it. The last couple times, I kind of got it. At all clear what I'm doing with these bonds. What I'm doing with the bonds is I'm paying a certain amount of my cash in order to play the game. But there's more than that. By making a higher bid, in which case I don't have as many stocks, or as much money for stocks at the beginning, I'm ensuring my right to get a certain certificate, to choose the certificates I want, and maybe either get a presidency directorship that I desire, because the oldest certificate gets the bonus there, and maybe instead drive people away from companies that they weren't going to get certificates from. The actual amount you bid determines your seating order. So people who are aggressive in their bids initially are all going to be sitting one after the other. Kind of weird little thing there. I'm not sure what the effect of that entirely is going to be. But people who think alike, people who are looking for the bargain to buy the most shares, are going to be sitting at the tail end of the table and have sort of the last pick of the shares. You're more likely to see an investor sitting at the back of the table, perhaps, because the shares that they were intending to invest in were picked by other people. But they're not forced to do that. They could instead go for a lesser company. I think that would be a bad choice, though. I think they're better off picking shares early if they trust the person who has those shares that fit their idea of what's going to work in the game. I think that's a better idea than try to strike out on your own and take a lesser company. Although, the person who wanted the LCR in my game, that's one of the lesser companies, but it's kind of an interesting lesser company in the sense that it's sitting right in the middle of two things, and it looks like a nice hookup. It actually isn't that nice because you're competing with other people and maybe not going to get your bond back anytime soon. Anyway, you've got a lot of decisions right at the front of the game. You know, what cities am I going to take? What corporation do I want to run? How much money can I afford? So you have to actually calculate it out, whether or not you can make your bond turn into a corporation that, you know, actually starts, because you're screwed if you don't manage that. Or you could just end up with a scattering of other people's shares if you kind of screwed up. The choice of the initial stock certificates determines what corporations are going to be in the game at the beginning half of the game. That's kind of neat too. If somebody screws up, they could end up taking a certificate, or not necessarily screws up, but kind of shifts their intentions. You could end up with a corporation being in that first half of the game without starting, and that's kind of weird. There's just so many things in that starting portfolio that, I don't know, I feel like a tremendous amount of thought and analysis of the game as a whole can go into what that first bid is. In a way that I don't think anything close to that happens with the private companies in, say, 1830. However, if you do reasonably okay on this, i.e. don't end up with like a lot of shares or shares in companies that aren't starting or whatever, if you don't end up totally screwing it up, you may be a little safer here. Because here's the weird thing in 1830. Some of those private companies are way undervalued compared to what kind of the received wisdom is on what they should be worth. Things like the Camden and Amboy in 1830 are often go for significantly more than their face value. Whereas some of the others, it's kind of like, gee, I'm not sure they're worth their face value even necessarily. Maybe if you force it on me, because more private companies is better than nothing. But some of them definitely seem like it's not worth bidding much on them. They don't give you much. All right. So you've got this tremendous decision at the beginning of the game. I'm not sure how much it decides the game. but it certainly is. In 1830 you have the seating order, which is just kind of this random thing. In this case, you have your own, they hand you the razor and ask you to slit your wrists. You could end up screwing up your start, but at least you're not being dealt a screwed up start in the same way. And in fact, that's kind of the interesting thing about this. There's no luck in it. There's no luck whatsoever. That's kind of neat. I don't think I've seen an 18XX that sat with absolutely no luck in it before. All of them have the seating order, at least. It's kind of an interesting factor in this, that you really do have the power yourself to determine everything in it. Now, some of that may be rock, paper, scissors kind of no luck, which is to say, oh, well, geez, how was I to know you would make that bid? You could have made any bid. You could have made any starting call. There's no real guarantee to what is the best starting bond. Although I think you want to go pretty low if you can. But there's an advantage to getting a little more than the other guy's pretty low. And with the sealed bid, it's kind of weird. I don't know. The fact that corporations and stock holdings change by the number of players, that's another weird thing. So the number of shares to float a corporation and the number of shares you can hold in that corporation shift by number of players. And that, again, kind of makes this whole thing kind of an art form to however it was designed. And I have no idea how well it plays in different numbers. I know that it's obviously, no matter what you do in 2 players, it's going to be whacked because you don't have numbers designed for that. But I think it could work in 2 if you tinkered all these numbers with the same kind of magic. And maybe it could work in 7 as well. There's no reason why not, but it's not as easy to do it as it is in an 1830 game. All right, and then you got your special rules for the BBCI. This game has lots of little special things tweaked here and there in it. Things that are different, things that don't make a lot of sense. There are some things that they've been too ambiguous about, like, I had one in my mind, something to do with the change of the presidency, I think. I don't know. There's a number of places where it's a little weird. There are things that are mechanically, or that are going to be a difficult issue to remember for the entire game. Hey, who held that stock for the longest? So you may want to house rule those kind of things because they're just too difficult to cope with otherwise. I know that I wouldn't want to deal with it. So that's one thing with the change of director. But I think there's something else where it's actually not even precise about it, I seem to remember. The rules for the first stock. Yeah, another random factor. If a minor company, not random, but I mean player determined, but really weird little obscure piece of rule that you have to be aware of the effect of. The complement of trains present in the game changes significantly based on what that initial bid is. Now that's just weird. I mean, it's part of this kind of magical stuff that goes into how the game gets determined. And the main reason for that is, I guess, those minor companies have cheaper share prices. So more of them can start. So if one of them starts, we need more trains in the early stage of the game. Something along those lines. But conceivably, 2 people who could start corporations each on their own, and you can pretty much start a corporation on your own in this game no matter what. It's not like 1830 where you'll only see a couple corporations start usually. There may be enough money for more, but there's usually not well, maybe in 4 players, everybody starts their own. But in 6 players, you usually see 2 or 3 corporations max, just because of an unwillingness to collaborate. In this, everybody can start their own, but it's not necessary that they might. Two people might end up insisting that, hey, I want these shares because this is the corporation that I know is going to work well. And if they do that, well, then they both hold 40% of that instead of, whatever else they might take. They'll pick the same bond certificates, and one of them will be director, but the other one's willing to go for the ride because they're going to make good money off that. And the director's share isn't important until the end of the game, terribly, unless you get two corporations. And this is a game where, man, I feel like you have more flexibility once you have two corporations than you do in most. Primarily because in most 18xx games, you gotta hold a couple of shares after you dump it. Here, you don't. You can rape a company and throw it all in the stock pool. It'll recover, that's fine. And it doesn't terribly hurt anyone, but you can take the benefit of raping a corporation without any real risk at all. Alternatively, you can rape a corporation when you only have one share of it. Or if you get really lucky, if you're the elephant. But I think that's pretty unlikely. I think chances are, if you really want to rape the company, you've got to hold a certificate in it and make sure that you have that managership. If somebody wants to take the directorship of it, fine, they're going to pay for a train out of pocket. Or not, just let them drown it, whatever. Just some really weird concepts in here. But that makes a lot of sense. So here's the thing. 18xx in general forces you to hold the president's share. You can't sell that. You can't sell that unless somebody else can take it in most games. In this game, that doesn't happen. And think about a publicly traded corporation. No one is forced to hold any shares. You can dump them at any time. And it doesn't really make sense to say, now wait a minute, no, you've got to keep that, and worse than that, you're personally liable. That's what a joint stock company's about. You're not personally liable. So in a way, all XX games kind of break the concept of the corporation. And this one actually succeeds in capturing that concept in a different sort of way. I like that a lot. The negative side of it, well, you can't hose someone over by dumping a corporation on them, but I don't know how much sense that makes at all. Some interesting little twists to the stock round, where if somebody corrected me on this because I left it out of my rules explanation, if I think Eric did, he seems to be a big XX player. If you end up selling a certificate, that doesn't count against you as a stock action. It's only when you buy certificates, and that's unusual in XX games. So the whole idea of the managers, the receivership type idea from other games at least, if nobody can hold the directorship, if nobody's got two shares anymore, you've got a manager. And the manager's got this special ability to borrow a train. So that gives you an incentive to drop yourself down to one share. Or less, but at one share, the company can still push forward, and you've still got a vested interest in it, and will probably make money off of it in the long run. At least if it's anywhere near buying that train. But, so it can build up towards that. But you don't have that opportunity if you have an actual director. If enough shares are sold, if one player holds the two shares essentially, then you no longer have that opportunity to kind of borrow a train. The borrowing a train's strange in this game. Most games that have borrowed trains don't count them for a phase change. This one does. that means that you can hurry the trains out without much cost to yourself by stripping them off a company, dropping yourself to one share, and then keep running it, or to no shares, it doesn't really matter. Keep running it until it buys that train, and no matter what, you force the phase change by just doing that. You don't even have to wait until it can buy that train. So that's kind of an interesting thing if you want to try to push the trains a little quicker. There was something else about the fact that the share value doesn't go down if you swallow. That's a little odd. It only goes down if you swallow and the company has shares in the bank pool. And that's kind of an interesting idea. There's no investor confidence? Great. That's why the share value is going down. If there's high investor confidence, even though it's building as a growth company and not paying out the dividends you expect, it still would be not falling in stock value, even if it doesn't give out. It should actually be going up, theoretically, because the company's becoming worth more. But it all goes up at once when it makes that big run, and that's something I love with the flat rate stock. I've already mentioned that, I think, here. The flat stock market from 29, where, hey, I made 4 times my stock value, I go up 4 spaces. That can be a nice big jump, and we saw that going on over several turns, where it's going up 3 spaces, then 2 for a couple of turns in a row, operating rounds in a row. And that's a really nice way to catch up when a company has been saving up for it. Unfortunately, you don't have, so because you're only able to hold 40% of the company, you're not in this position where you kind of are holding a big share of this corporation and then make it jump forward really, really fast at once. And you probably may not want to be holding, well, so the thing is that someone else could be holding 40% along with you, knowing you're going to run it well. But if you have 2 companies, that's just kind of silly, because you could just be using that your company as a feeder company anyway. So while it's swallowing or while it's borrowing a train and can't pay out, it's too risky for other people to hold the shares. But for you, you're probably only holding 1 share in that circumstance anyway. It's probably a manager's share situation. So you're not in this position where you get to hold something. I mean, I guess you could, but you're not usually in that position, because usually it's going to be a manager position that causes the stock value not to rise and actually go down. And you're not going to be in this position where you're swallowing continuously with a lot of shares and then you make up for it with this big jump forward. I guess it's possible, but I would suspect most players would not aim to do that as easily or as often. 1829, I think, although I've only played that once, I think, is probably more prone to long periods of swallowing because you don't have that manager to fall back on, if I recall correctly. May have played it wrong. No, I wasn't the person who read the rules to that. I should pick it up, though, to see if it is worthy of having founded this entire line of games. I've always just assumed it was so stilted that it wasn't. Okay. Track lays. You have that interesting idea with the major corporations of being able to lay 2 tracks. And then you have this weird little option. If you start in the early stage of the game, do you want to pay for every double track lay, or do you want them to come free? That's kind of a neat little option. There's no real easy way to remember that. You have to kind of just do it. Chances are most people will pay. Company 1 with its £50 per thing is a little harder. But then it becomes, okay, you got to remember which of the major companies started in the late period of the game because they won't have to pay. The actual tracks, wow, they're just so different from any other game I've seen of 18xx.
I mean, I'm used to just the commercial ones, really, and the 1830 knockoffs. I had to do a video on what I think of all the 1830 games. I may do that today. And yes, the promotion may not be what you expect. There are tiles that aren't in this game that you may have gotten used to. And there are some weird things. And apparently there were even weirder things in the original version. For example, no broad curve, small town track was in the original, from what I understand reading a post. I don't remember, because when we played the original, we played with the 2 expansions. Now, one of those expansions was filled with all kinds of random stuff. So when I was saying this is the game with no randomness, yeah, but then they came out with the most random thing, like a random events deck or something. I don't remember much about it, but I remember thinking, this doesn't feel like 1830 or any other XX that belongs with that title. But this one surely does. This feels very, very. There's a lot of twists, but very much in the flavor. It's just not as elegant as most Tresham designs. Certainly not with the rules. They're much more complicated. The big cities are kind of weird. You've got especially Calcutta and Delhi, which never connect, and you can't run from one city to the other. We used to do that in 1830, I think, until we found out we couldn't. That was kind of weird, or maybe it was in something else in Buchanan 30. Now I can't remember. I remember the New York to New York run being a big deal. I don't remember if you're allowed to or not now. I think you are. I think 30 allows it, but other games don't. Okay, once you make your contract, you get your cash back. That's your only bonus here. Once the track is connected, and actually, being an investor turned out not to be that bad. He got his money back before some of the people who were trying actively to hook up one company's worth of shares. It's kind of cool because you can, as an investor, you can just select stocks that are near each other. And, you know, you make this initial bid of money, and then you just have to kind of aim towards that money. Now, he was an accidental investor. He intended not to be an investor, but chose to be one instead. Base stations, the tokens in this. Track isn't shared that much in this game. In the early parts, they're not as competitive. And in the late part of the game, it's so easy to open up cities. Really, the big deal becomes trying to keep people from screwing your little doinkers, because when you make your track runs, the doinkers don't count against your train. And I love that. Some games, well, the 1830 line kind of has the, hey, you're paying for those little doinkers, the small towns, just like they're big cities, and it sucks to hit them. 1856 lets you eliminate them. That's cool. Some games allow you to hit a certain number of them in addition to hitting a certain number of large towns. That's kind of a nice compromise. This makes them just godlike. You know, you want as many of them as you can because they just don't count against you, and that's kind of cool. So you even have a one train, which is allowed to hit as many of them and up to one large city. Well, it has to hit a large city because you need a dot in it. The mail run, an interesting way to push cash constantly into the companies. I don't find it destabilizing. Some people have said, oh, there's always so much cash in the game. Yeah, if you set up a single big run, a run between two big cities, yes, you can get a lot of cash into your company and buy trains off of it. But if you're optimizing your own in-pocket money, maybe you can't, because maybe you've got a big string of doinkers you got to hit. And maybe there's only a doinker at the end of that, or maybe there's a small city at the end of that you want to hit instead. So you may be able to engineer or luck into good runs there, and you always have kind of the choice to not make as much in pocket, but that's a bad idea, because it's you're working for here, not your corporation. And in this game, it highlights it more than any other, because you can discard corporations as well as you like, as long as there's other stuff to buy. And unlike 1835, there seem to always be shares to buy. There's more shares than the players can hold. 1835, wow. I never liked the way that panned out because there would always be a couple of companies worth owning. And the rest of the shares maybe less so, but basically everything just about sold out and everybody sat where they were. Now in this, everything sold out. But there was always the opportunity, if you trashed a company, for there to be something better, because there'd be the previous trashed company, which is in slightly better shape than yours now, having been in management for a longer period of time. I've already kind of talked about the share price adjustment coming out multiple times. You have complete freedom, except for a manager renting a train, to buy and sell trains. It's not $1, it's $10 instead, but that's no big deal. I mean, money is easy in this game for the corporations. They always have $10 at that point if they ran a train. So unless you kind of screw up, you'll have some cash on board that you can buy a train from another corporation. You know what's not clear? How much you, as the president, can spend on a train. Okay? If you're buying from the bank, you can pay. But the rules in selling between corporations are not unambiguous. Which is to say, the rules for a president stepping in and buying a train, I'm assuming he cannot do this when you're buying between companies, but it's not explicit in the rules. And if you were to allow that, that would be a way for a president to donate money into another corporation, which is what's really ugly, and that's what you don't want to allow. Otherwise, the president, the corporation has to wipe out its entire fund when the president buys the company a trade. There's no requirement to buy a trade, though, and therefore there's no bankruptcy in this game. And that's kind of a neat thing, because 1832 often ends, as I've said, especially at something like the WPC, where people say, hey, I lost this game. I'm not going to win. It's early in the game. And either A, I want out of the game, so I'm going to go bankrupt, or B, all right, I'm going to try something really, really risky, and maybe I'll win. Maybe I'll be able to advance, you know. But otherwise, I go bankrupt. So that completely skews the game. If you've got like this meta game going on where somebody thinks that, well, this is the general. There's this general case of, is winning the only thing? Is that the only place? Is it a binary decision? Or does coming in second matter? Or does coming in third matter? Or does how much money you have, not absolute, but proportional to the other players, does that matter at all? Does going bankrupt count as worse, assuming you don't win? I mean, you can still place pretty well in 1830 going bankrupt, right? I haven't managed to win that way. But is going bankrupt, you know, and to the extent where you've come in last place by a lot, is that any worse than coming in second? And if players don't see a distinguishment between those two, and other players do, you've got people sitting at the table playing wildly different games, right? So if somebody has decided that they can no longer come in first, but they could probably come in second or third, yet they're willing to risk it all on a first place position, in case maybe other people play very stupidly and don't see what they're doing. That makes sense from their point of view, because they cannot win, but this is their only chance, that people are stupid. And that, I think, may be the factor in the WPC. Another factor may well just be, I can't win. I'm not going to get a plaque in this tournament. I'm not going to get any kind of recognition at all. There's some other game I could go play. I'm going to crash the game. And that, you know, between those two, and that one again is a metagame informing a different a different victory condition, but that one is certainly less honorable, I think. There, you're essentially, but how terrible is it, you know? And so as a player in the WBC, you have to count on that the game is going to crash early. So never count on the damn thing not ending in a bankruptcy early, because some bozo will bail the game. Maybe in the final round. People might actually be playing competitively, because there I think placing in the final round actually is important towards getting your name on a plaque, or you know, getting some kind of recognition of some sort. To me, every game I view in something of a, yes, I'm taking the context of the world of the game somewhat into view here. And if I go completely bankrupt, then and come in last, I don't win, I don't place second by bankrupting. I'm not going bankrupt because of the game mechanics and thereby coming into a good place, better place than I could otherwise. If I really go bankrupt and really lose the game, that's different from playing the game out and still placing in a fairly good position because I was able to recover from some of my losses. And you could say, well, you're playing with a different viewpoint than we are. Yeah. But I feel like that's part of what the subject matter of the game is. If I'm penniless on the street at the end of the game, shaking my cup asking for change, that's a little different than if I'm a multimillionaire who didn't come in first, Anyway, this one takes all that out of it. If I screw up and do poorly, yeah, I'm still in it, I'm still playing. Although, I could walk away from the game and just leave my stock holdings there. And that actually wouldn't be a big deal. I could sell my shares and walk away from the game, and that wouldn't be a big deal. That would be legitimate within the rules without affecting anything. So the game only ends on two matters. One is if the bank breaks, in which case you keep playing the rest of the operating round. A nice thing, because nobody gets an advantage from what seems like an almost random occurrence, right? You have so little control. You can understand when the bank's going to break, but you may not be the company. You may be the company after the bank breaks, and you don't want to get shafted by that. That would feel cheap. On the other hand, if a company can engineer getting to the top stock value, they deserve that little extra bonus. Now, do the people who went before them? That's harder to say. Because you see, this game, unlike most 18xx's, where in most games it's the highest valued stock that goes first, don't have any problem with that. Here, it's the highest par starting value, essentially, although you have no control over that, which is kind of sad, gets to go first. So yeah, let's talk about that par value, because that's kind of a weird thing. There's other games that have this. If I recall correctly, 35 has it, where the par value is just fixed. You buy the company at a certain price, and you have no option. You can't set the par. I usually don't like that, and I kind of don't like it here, but I can sort of explain it. And in either game, based on, again, the context of the game, right? That's what the design's about. The context of the world is, look, this corporation is in an important and rich area that requires a certain investment capital to convince the government to grant that monopoly that a rail would have. And in that sense, that's what's behind the bonding. And to some extent, that's what's behind, I think, the fixed par values is, look, you don't have enough money to play here. Go away, kid. You're bothering me. Anyway, what's the overall on it? Like I said, I'm pleasantly surprised. I had been fully expecting to take a look at this game and say, oh man, why did I buy this? And instead, I'm walking away from it saying, wow, that's got some really neat ideas.
And it's a lot harsher than I expected it to be. This was the criticism I had with 29, definitely. Now, that I only played opposed once, maybe twice. I think only once, like this. And I feared it with this, but I'm much more certain with it in 29, although I can never be certain when I play something opposed. Was I had this feeling of, oh my god, I can't do anything about my situation. Now, I vaguely remember that feeling in this, but I think we may have bailed on 53 partway through, just because everything was all messed up. You know? 180 minute playing time, 3 hours. Yeah, I think you'd be hard pressed to get this done in 3 hours. More like 4 or 5, I'd say, minimum. It's not a huge, super long 18XX. It's not an 1870. It definitely kind of drags at the end, but there's still interesting stuff going on at the end. Interesting stuff that maybe even 30 doesn't hit. I feel like there's more opportunity because of the manager situation. The ability to just, yeah, I want that train. I don't want that company anymore. No matter what, nobody can stop you. In 1830, they can stop you. They can look at you and say, you've got 2 companies there. You've got priority on me. I don't think I want 2 shares of either of your companies. Perfectly reasonable decision in 30, but that means you're stuck running them both. In this, no, you're never stuck running anything. You can always decide, yeah, I'm not that interested in this company anymore. I'll take its trains and it can go away. And that almost makes this feel more fluid and more harsh than a 30 game. Even though you can't smack somebody upside the head with a company and just devastate them. And in a way that's kind of nice, because too many times in 1830 you see somebody, ooh, I'm making good money, I got my 4 shares of the B&O. What? Hey, no, where are my trains? I would have been glad to take the company a minute ago, but no, not now. And maybe they're not knocked out of the game. Maybe they're not bankrupted. If they were bankrupted, fine. You know, the game's over. Great. You got hosed. Too bad, man. But if you're not bankrupted, if you're stuck with like 3 or 4 shares and a crap company that's never going to make it, and you can't even sell those shares because the bank pool's full and nobody else wants your garbage, and you're just hosed. And maybe you bought a temporary train with that hosed money, and you know you're going to get hosed again, and nobody wants to buy your company. You can't get rid of the shares. You can't do anything good. Boy, that's pretty miserable. And I've seen that happen to... we usually wouldn't let that happen to newer players because I would advise them. I would tell them, you don't want to hold those 2 shares. Somebody can hose you. And everybody would be like, shh. Well, the guy's new. I'm going to advise him. He's going to beat me, but I'm going to advise him. Yeah, quite often the new player would win a game of 1830 because I gave better advice than I'd be playing. And everybody else would be pissed off because he's making good investments all over the place based on my knowledge. Which I tended to give better advice than I would even play when I'm sitting at the table not giving advice. Because I'm really thinking, and I'm not willing to give bad advice to that person, and I'm not going to give that person really risky advice. Like they'll say, oh, should I start this company? And I'd say, well, there's a chance that this could go terribly wrong for you. Like, I'd think things through more. So with this, it's friendlier to the new player. You get handed a crap company, you can ditch it. You know, you may not have seen it coming, but you can still sell those shares and get rid of that. No big deal. There's not that hidden hell in there. So that's actually a reason why this might be appealing to a new player. And I don't think XX players have a huge advantage in this one over non-XX players. They're going to have some. 1853 players are going to have an advantage in this. 1853 has a lot to learn about it, I'm pretty sure. That I don't know how much I've scratched the surface of. I've learned a lot, but I still feel like there's a whole lot more in that whole initial bond process. I would walk into the next game
not being sure still what I'm doing. All right, I chatted a lot about this, in part because I'm really impressed by it, and I think it's very different from any other XX that I've seen. And it's not in my top tier of XX games. Like I said, I think I'm going to do a comparison of all the XX games. People want me to do top 10 lists all the time. I can't do that, but I can look at one system and say, here's why I like this game out of the system, here's what I like about this one, here's why I don't like this one, a lot easier. And here's why I like the system as a whole compared to maybe other train games or whatever. Like, I could do all the train games at once. I just can't do, oh yeah, I want to do Go, and do I pick 1856, 1830, 61 over here? I can never remember what it is. 61, which I've only played once. This one would not be up there with those three. Those three I like a lot. Baltimore and Ohio, I think I like more than this. The hell with doing... You get it here. If you don't watch this, you lose out, man. This one sits, I think, after those. Then come kind of the iffy ones. 1870, 2038. I like things about them a lot, but they stretch on too long, and there are real problems with the trains not coming out. Some people say they come out. I don't believe them. You come play with me and show me. No, I mean, it depends on the group. If you've got people willing to sacrifice all over the place to do it, sure. But I'll win by not doing that. I can almost guarantee you that. I've played enough games where I've tried doing both solitaire. You don't want the trains to come out. No matter what, you are hurting yourself to bring the trains out in those games. Unless you play with less trains. If you cut the train numbers down, drop a couple trains. Or here's the magic one in 1870. What is it? The 10 train kills the 5 train. That option will shake it up a lot. So those are ones that I feel have a serious flaw with them. And then there's what I consider the bottom rank. 1835, which I don't consider very enjoyable at all. It's too fixed. Now, there are people who say there are options, the snake or something like that, which shake up the starting position a little bit. But it's not just the starting position. It's just the way the game develops. I just don't feel like there's anything interesting going on in that whole game. And the fact that there's this clog before the track comes out. So this one, all the companies do come out in one big flush. You've got this initial bunch that the people bid on, and then you've got the rest, and the rest will come out when everybody's ready and they've bought their shares. That's a neat aspect, holding the companies off, but based on player activity. 1835 holds all the companies off, and it's just based on when the money flows. I mean, because you're going to buy your shares when you can, and you're going to take your advantages, and yeah, you may give somebody else a bigger advantage than you're taking, but that's okay because you're getting an advantage on everybody except that person, unless they're the winner, and then maybe you'll hold on and be real nice to everyone else and let the winner take the small advantage and give the big advantage to the next player, and then you're just one of the people who's hosed out in the cold, which would suck from my position because I don't play for only first place, but I play for my position, right? So I may make a move that everybody else says, oh no, you're helping the winner. Yeah, but at least I'm going to place in this stupid predetermined game. And then I actually look at 18GA and 18AL a little below that. Why? Because they're just 1830. Now, you could say, well, wait, you like 1830, it's in your top tier. Yeah, if you can't get 1830, if you want a print and play game, take one of those. They're not quite as interesting as 1830 in a few ways, and maybe the newest release of 1830, which has even an additional option in it, is even better. To me, they're just a waste because I have 30. They're like what the I gotta always look at the name. Age of Steam, not Steam or Railways of Steam or Worlds of Steam or whatever, or Steampunk or yeah. Okay, but unlike, to me, 18AL and 18GA are like new maps for Age of Steam. Okay, maybe they're a cool idea, maybe I can look at them as some expansion, but they really don't add anything to my world. And the new maps to Age of Steam may actually add more. Because I've tried playing at least one of them, the little 2-player Jamaica or something. That's kind of interesting. So I actually bought some more maps, and I'm curious about maybe they'll be better than the 18ALGA combination. But to me, those are two games that are just, hey, let's play 1830 on a slightly different map. And so there are a few little things you got to figure out about how the track lays work and the companies work, but that's so minor. This is a game supposedly about engineering, but it doesn't, I don't know, it feels so different from just track lay changes. There's just so much to this one that is different and interesting to explore that I really, I don't like the lack of the stock market manipulation side of it as much. So that's kind of the negative for me. I love the stock market manipulation in 56, 30, and probably 61. 61 may be the best in the bunch, but I don't know. I mean, it's like, I'm not willing to say 56 is the best of the bunch, even though I've probably played it, I don't know, close to 10 times. Because I've played 30 so many, and I haven't explored 56 enough in those 10 times. 61 on one playing, I certainly can't say that on. But those are the candidates there. This one without the stock manipulation doesn't impress me quite as much, but there seems to be a lot of other really cool stuff going on beyond that, including the jump in the track, which seems more, I don't know, it's close to the stock manipulation. I got up my rating on it.